Chiun dropped through the ceiling like a nightmare-given form, her modified skeleton compressing and expanding as she landed in perfect silence behind Dr. Klixva's workstation. The Veltar researcher continued its analysis of human neural patterns, completely unaware that the subject of its study now stood within striking distance of its primary breathing apparatus. The laboratory around them hummed with the sound of science turned to cruelty. Dozens of specimens floated in biostasis chambers, their forms twisted by experiments that pushed the boundaries of what consciousness could endure. Chun recognized some of them. A Terran Volf that had been modified to live in vacuum. A Centaurian battle squid whose neural pathways had been rewired to broadcast its pain across subspace frequencies. The Veltar collected suffering like other species collected art, refining it into increasingly sophisticated forms. Dr. Klixva's forearms moved with practiced precision across holographic displays that showed anatomical diagrams of species from across the galaxy. Each display represented years of research into the most efficient methods to cause pain, fear, and despair. The creature's work had broken the minds of entire civilizations, reducing proud warrior races to trembling shadows of their former selves. Chun's blade whispered from its sheath, the molecular edge catching the laboratory's artificial light and fracturing it into spectrums that had no names in any known language. The weapon hummed with barely contained energy, eager to complete the purpose for which it had been forged. She had carried it across 17 star systems, through battles that had carved her legend into the nightmares of an empire, and now it would taste the blood of its creator. The human moved with the fluid grace of something that had evolved beyond the normal constraints of physics and morality. Each step was calculated, each breath timed to match the station's ambient rhythms. She had learned patience from watching. Her people Dai had discovered precision through years of planning that had consumed everything human about her except the rage that burned at her core, like a star on the verge of collapse. Dr. Klixva finally sensed her presence, its enhanced awareness detecting the electromagnetic signature of Chun's augmented nervous system. The creature began to turn, its compound eyes widening as they focused on the impossibility that stood behind it. The Veltar had spent decades studying human physiology, mapping every weakness and limitation with scientific precision. Their research had concluded that humans were physically inferior to most galactic species, lacking the natural weapons and defenses that evolution had granted to more successful life forms. They had never accounted for what humans became when they stopped caring about survival and started caring about making others pay for what they had taken. Chain's blade found the gap between the creature's thoracic plates, before its nervous system could process the threat. The molecular edge sliced through bio-armor that could deflect, plasma bolts and severed neural pathways that had evolved to process information faster than light could travel. Dr. Klixva's scream died in its throat as its vocal cords separated from the neural pathways that controlled them. The Veltar researcher collapsed against its workstation, its forearms twitching in random patterns as its dying brain sent confused signals through severed connections. Qian caught the creature's falling form and lowered it gently to the floor, her movements almost tender in their precision. She had learned much about anatomy during her captivity, and she wanted Dr. Klixva to remain conscious for what came next. She knelt beside the dying alien, her augmented voice speaking in perfect Veltar as she watched the light fade from its compound eyes. The words she chose had been selected with the same care she applied to her killing techniques, each syllable designed to convey concepts that would haunt the creature's final moments. "You wanted to understand human psychology," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated with Veltar auditory organs in frequencies that triggered primal fear responses. "You mapped our neural pathways, studied our reactions to pain and loss. But you never understood what makes us different from every other species you've conquered." Dr. Klixva's breathing apparatus wheezed as it struggled to form words through vocal cords that were slowly separating from its central nervous system. The creature's enhanced intelligence allowed it to understand exactly what was happening to its body, to feel each connection severing as Chun's blade had done its work with surgical precision. "We don't just fight for territory or resources. Chen continued, her blade tracing patterns across the creature's carapace that matched the scars covering her own body. We fight for memory, for the ghosts of everyone you took from us. And unlike every other species in your collection, we never forget a debt. The laboratory's emergency lighting activated as Chun's sabotage began to cascade through the station's systems. Red warnings flashed across displays as containment fields throughout the facility started to fluctuate. The Veltar had collected specimens from the most dangerous predators in the galaxy, creatures whose only purpose was to kill efficiently and without remorse. Soon they would be free to pursue their evolutionary imperatives in an environment full of soft, vulnerable scientists who had never imagined becoming prey. Chun rose from the dying researcher's side and moved to the central control console, her fingers dancing across interfaces that controlled the life support for hundreds of biostasis chambers. The specimens floating in their artificial wombs had been taken from their homeworlds as infants, raised in captivity to serve as test subjects for experiments that pushed the boundaries of what living tissue could endure. They had never known freedom, never experienced the hunt that was their birthright. Today, they would learn what they had been denied. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency across the controls, each gesture calculated to maximize chaos and destruction. The Veltar had designed their systems to be foolproof, protected by layers of security that no conventional assault could penetrate. They had never considered that someone might gain access to their systems through 17 months of captivity, learning their protocols, through careful observation while pretending to be broken by their experiments. The first containment field collapsed in Laboratory 7, releasing a pack of Andromedan shadow stalkers that had been modified for increased aggression. The creatures materialized in the laboratory like living nightmares, their forms shifting between dimensions as they detected the scent of Veltar fear pheromones. Their hunting instincts, suppressed by years of forced sedation, exploded into consciousness with the fury of evolution denied. The shadow stalkers moved through the laboratory like darkness given purpose, their forms phasing through walls and obstacles as they pursued prey that had never learned to run from anything more dangerous than academic politics, the Veltar. Researchers tried to activate their personal defense systems, but the creatures they faced existed partially outside normal space-time and could not be targeted by conventional weapons. Chun watched through the laboratory security feeds as chaos spread through the station like a virus specifically engineered to destroy order. Each released specimen brought its own particular brand of destruction from the crystalline hunters. That could restructure matter at the molecular level to the psychic parasites that fed on conscious thought itself. The Veltar had collected them all as trophies of conquest, never suspecting that their greatest prizes would become the instruments of their doom. The station's AI began broadcasting emergency alerts as its sensors detected massive system failures throughout the facility. Automated defense turrets activated and immediately began targeting anything that moved, their programming unable to distinguish between escaping specimens and Veltar personnel. The creatures that the aliens had spent decades studying and torturing were now free to demonstrate why their species had evolved to be apex predators on worlds where survival required constant vigilance. Chun accessed the communication systems and sent a single message across subspace frequencies that would reach every Veltar facility in the sector. The transmission contained detailed anatomical diagrams of Veltar physiology, highlighting the precise pressure points and neural pathways that could disable or kill their species most efficiently. She had learned this information during her captivity, memorizing every detail while pretending to be broken by their experiments. Now, every resistance cell in the galaxy would know exactly how to kill their oppressors, the message concluded with coordinates for 17 other research stations and a detailed analysis of their security vulnerabilities. Chun had spent 3 years mapping the Veltar Empire's secret infrastructure, identifying the facilities where they conducted their most sensitive research. Each location housed thousands of specimens taken from conquered worlds, creatures whose only crime had been existing on planets that the aliens wanted to claim. Today, all of them would be free. Captain Zara Chun moved through the shadow-drenched corridors of the hegemony, Research station like death itself had learned to walk on two legs. Her breathing was controlled, measured, each exhale timed to match the station's ambient hum that masked her approach. The gravity boots she wore made no sound against the polished metal floors, their magnetic fields calibrated to perfection through years of practice that had cost her everything. She once held dear the alien station stretched before her in impossible geometries that would have driven lesser minds to madness. Crystalline walls pulsed with bioluminescent veins that carried information faster than any human computer could process. The Veltar had built this place as a monument to their superiority, a research facility where they studied the primitive species they had conquered across 17 star systems. Today, it would become their tomb. Chun's augmented eyes scanned the thermal signatures bleeding through the walls, cataloging each life form with the cold precision of a predator that had evolved beyond mercy. 47 Veltar researchers worked in the laboratories below, their chitinous bodies radiating heat signatures that appeared as bright orange silhouettes in her enhanced vision. They believed themselves safe behind force fields and automated defense systems that could vaporize a charging Raxian war beast in microseconds. They had never encountered a human who had nothing left to lose. The datapad strapped to her forearm displayed the station's layout in painful detail. Every ventilation shaft, every power coupling, every weakness she had memorized during 3 months of preparation that had pushed her sanity to its breaking point. The Veltar had made their first mistake when they destroyed Earth's colonies. Their second mistake was letting one human survive to remember what they had taken. Her fingers traced the molecular blade at her hip, a weapon forged from materials that existed only in the hearts of dying stars. The Veltar had created it to study human physiology, never suspecting that their greatest achievement would become the instrument of their destruction. The blade could cut through their bio-armor like paper, could slice apart their neural clusters before their enhanced reflexes could even register the threat. Chun paused at a junction where 3 corridors converged, her enhanced hearing detecting the subtle vibrations that indicated approaching footsteps. A Veltar guard rounded the corner, its compound eyes scanning for threats that its training had never prepared it to recognize. The creature stood 8 feet tall, its carapace gleaming with embedded sensors that could detect heartbeats from 100 meters away. It carried a plasma rifle that could liquefy steel and war, armor that had deflected the claws of apex predators from a dozen worlds. None of that mattered when Chun struck. She moved with the fluid grace of a dancer and the lethal precision of a surgical instrument, her blade finding the gap between the creature's neck plates before its nervous system could even register her presence. The molecular edge severed its main neural pathway in a cut, so clean that the Veltar's dying brain couldn't send distress signals to its own body. The massive form crumpled to the deck without a sound, its weapons clattering harmlessly beside it. Chun dragged the corpse into an empty storage bay, her movements economical and practiced. She had perfected this technique on 17 previous stations, each one a stepping stone toward this moment. The Veltar Empire spanned half the galaxy, but they had grown complacent in their dominance. They had forgotten that sometimes the most dangerous predator was the one that hunted not for territory or resources, but for something far more primal. The central laboratory lay 3 levels below, accessible through a maintenance shaft that the Veltar had assumed was too narrow for their own bulky forms to navigate. They had never considered that evolution might produce a species capable of folding itself into impossibly tight spaces when motivated by the proper incentives. Chun's genetically modified skeleton compressed and shifted as she squeezed through openings that would have crushed an unaugmented human. Her bones bending in ways that defied conventional physics, she emerged in a storage room adjacent to the main laboratory, where the Veltar conducted their most sensitive research. Through the transparent walls, she could see them working with specimens from across the galaxy, their 4-armed forms manipulating instruments with the casual arrogance of a species that had never known defeat. They studied the neural patterns of conquered races, mapping the pathways of fear and pain with scientific detachment that would have impressed the most Dedicated torturer. Dr. Klixva, the station's chief researcher, stood at the center of it all like a spider in its web. The creature's bioluminescent patches pulsed with the satisfaction of recent discoveries. Its multiple eyes focused on a display that showed human brain patterns under extreme stress. Chun recognized the readings immediately. They were her own, recorded during the experiments that had transformed her from a colonial surveyor into something that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional warfare. The Veltar had intended to break her mind, to understand how humans processed trauma so they could inflict it more efficiently on future subjects. Instead, they had created something that understood their weaknesses with intimate detail. They had taught her their language, shown her their anatomy, demonstrated their technology with the casual cruelty of scientists, who never expected their laboratory rat to bite back. Chun's hand found the device at her belt. A quantum disruptor she had constructed from components stolen during her escape. The weapon would collapse the station's containment field simultaneously, releasing every specimen they had collected over decades of conquest. The Veltar had gathered predators from across the galaxy, creatures whose evolutionary purpose was to kill efficiently and without remorse. Soon they would learn what it felt like to be prey in their own laboratory. She moved to the ventilation controls, her fingers dancing across alien interfaces with the familiarity of someone who had studied every system aboard the station. The atmospheric processors began to cycle, introducing a compound she had synthesized from her own modified blood chemistry. It was undetectable to Veltar sensors, but would enhance the aggression of every carbon-based life form in the facility below her. Dr. Klixva paused in its work, its sensory organs detecting a change in the station's environmental balance. The creature's head tilted toward the ceiling, compound eyes searching for threats that its training insisted could not exist. The Veltar had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years through careful observation and methodical domination. They had cataloged every species, mapped every world, conquered every civilization that dared to resist their expansion. They had never encountered anything. Like Zara Chun, the human smiled in the darkness above their heads, her augmented teeth gleaming with predatory satisfaction. The Veltar had taught her that death was an art form when properly applied. They had shown her anatomical diagrams of every species in their collection, demonstrated the most efficient methods to disable neural functions, explained the precise pressure points that could drop a charging beast in its tracks. Today, she would teach them that humans were capable students. The station's lights flickered as Chun's modifications to the power grid began to take effect. Emergency protocols activated throughout the facility, but the AI systems she had subverted reported nothing more threatening than routine maintenance fluctuations. The Veltar continued their work, their supreme confidence in their technology blinding them to the predator that stalked through their domain with the patient hunger of evolution itself. Chun checked her chronometer and smiled. In exactly 17 minutes, the containment fields would fail simultaneously. The specimens would be free to express their natural instincts, and the Veltar would discover what it meant to be on the wrong end of the food chain. But before that happened, she had personal business to conclude. She had promises to keep to the dead, and Dr. Klixva was about to learn why humans were the only species in the galaxy that hunted for revenge. The station's emergency klaxons finally began to wail, but Chun had already completed her primary mission. She moved through corridors filled with the screams of creatures that had forgotten what it meant to be predators, until freedom reminded them of their true nature. The Veltar researchers ran through their own facility like frightened children, their scientific arrogance replaced by the primal terror that came from realizing they were no longer at the top of the food chain. Chun paused at an observation window that showed the main laboratory, where a pack of Rigelian void hunters had cornered a group of scientists near the quantum containment arrays. The creatures moved like liquid shadow, their forms shifting and flowing as they surrounded their prey with the patient efficiency of evolution perfected. The Veltar had studied these beings for decades, mapping their neural patterns and testing their pain responses with clinical detachment. Now, the void hunters were conducting their own research, Learning what Veltar, fear, tasted like when properly seasoned with desperation, she accessed the station's internal communication system and spoke in perfect Veltar, her words carrying across every speaker in the facility. The message she delivered had been carefully crafted during 3 years of planning, each phrase designed to maximize psychological impact on a species that prided itself on logical superiority. Attention! Researchers of Station Kethmara, her voice echoed through corridors filled with the sounds of systematic revenge. You have spent decades studying the concept of fear as it applies to conquered species. Today you will have the opportunity to contribute to that research personally. The security feed showed Veltar personnel attempting to reach evacuation pods, their movements hampered by creatures that had learned to hunt in environments where their prey could phase through solid matter or manipulate gravity itself. The aliens had collected specimens from across the galaxy without considering that their captives might retain the hunting instincts that had made them apex predators on worlds where weakness meant extinction. John moved toward the station's power core, her path taking her through sections where the emergency lighting cast everything in shades of red that reminded her of the blood she had shed during her escape from captivity. The corridors echoed with sounds that had no equivalent in any civilized language, primal expressions of rage and hunger that spoke to evolutionary imperatives older than civilization itself. She found Commander Thexal barricaded in the security center, surrounded by the corpses of guards who had tried to protect their superior with weapons designed to stop conventional threats. The Veltar officer had emptied an entire plasma magazine into a creature that existed partially outside normal spacetime, achieving nothing except the complete exhaustion of his defensive systems. The Shadow Stalker that stalked him through the security center moved with the patient inevitability of entropy itself, testing the barriers that separated it from its prey with the methodical precision of a scientist conducting an experiment. The creature had evolved on a world where matter and energy were fluid concepts, where survival required the ability to exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Commander Thexal had studied the creature's capabilities for 7 years, subjecting it to experiments that pushed the boundaries of what consciousness could endure. He had mapped its neural pathways, tested its pain responses, and documented its psychological breaking point with the clinical detachment of someone who had never imagined becoming the subject of similar research. Chun entered the security center through a maintenance shaft that the commander had never bothered to secure. Emerging behind his position like death itself, had learned to navigate three-dimensional space. Her molecular blade hummed with anticipation as she approached the alien officer, who had personally overseen the experiments that had killed everyone she had ever loved. "Commander Thexal," she said, her voice causing the alien to spin around with the desperate speed of prey that had finally realized it was being hunted. "I believe you wanted to study human psychological responses to extreme stress. Consider this a practical demonstration." The Veltar officer reached for his sidearm with movements slowed by terror that his enhanced nervous system was struggling to process. His species had evolved on a world where they were the dominant predators, where their multiple eyes and enhanced reflexes made them nearly invincible against any conventional threat. They had never developed instincts for dealing with something that hunted them with the patient precision of evolution, given purpose. Shin's blade took his primary weapon arm at the shoulder joint, severing the neural pathways that controlled his most sophisticated appendage. The molecular edge cauterized the wound even as it cut, preventing blood loss while ensuring that the commander remained conscious for everything that followed. She had learned surgical precision during her captivity, studying Veltar anatomy while pretending to be broken by their experiments. "The human specimens you collected," she continued, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated with Veltar auditory organs and frequencies that triggered primal fear responses. "They had families, children, people who loved them and waited for them to come home." Commander Thexal tried to speak, his vocal apparatus struggling to form words. Through a nervous system that was slowly shutting down under stress levels his species had never evolved to handle. The creature that had spent decades studying fear was discovering that academic knowledge provided no protection against the genuine article when it was applied with scientific precision. Chun's blade found his secondary nervous cluster, severing connections with cuts so precise that each limb shut down independently while leaving his primary consciousness intact. The commander's body collapsed in sections, each part losing function in a carefully choreographed sequence that demonstrated exactly how much she had learned about Veltar physiology. During her captivity, the station shuddered as explosions echoed through its superstructure, the sound of containment systems failing throughout the facility. Chun had programmed the cascade failures to occur in a specific sequence, ensuring that the most dangerous specimens were released first to maximize chaos and prevent any organized evacuation attempts. The Veltar had collected predators from 17 different star systems, creatures whose only purpose was to kill efficiently and without remorse. Now they were free to pursue their evolutionary imperatives in an environment filled with soft, vulnerable scientists who had never imagined that their research subjects might one day become their executioners. Chun left Commander Vexal to contemplate his approaching death and made her way to the station's central power core, where the real work would begin. The fusion reactor that powered the facility was protected by safeguards designed to prevent any conceivable accident or sabotage attempt. The Veltar engineers had assumed that no enemy could gain access to the core without triggering dozens of automated security protocols. They had never considered that someone might learn their systems through 17 months of careful observation, while pretending to be broken by their experiments. She entered the reactor chamber through service tunnels that required her modified skeleton to compress into configurations that would have killed an unaugmented human. The power core stretched before her like a miniature star contained within crystalline matrices that could withstand the gravitational stress of a collapsed planet. It was a monument to Veltar engineering excellence, a testament to their technological superiority over the primitive species they had conquered. Today, it would become their funeral pyre. Chun attached quantum charges to the containment field generators, devices she had constructed from components stolen during her escape from captivity. Each explosive had been calibrated to create a specific type of failure cascade, ensuring that the reactor would not simply explode but would collapse in a way that created a temporary dimensional rift. The resulting anomaly would consume the station and everything within a 3-light-year radius, sending a message across the galaxy that could not be ignored or misinterpreted. She activated the timer and began her withdrawal from the station, moving through corridors that echoed with the sounds of systematic revenge being extracted by creatures that had never forgotten what freedom tasted like. The Veltar had believed that superior technology and scientific method made them invincible against any primitive resistance. They had never encountered a human who had learned their systems from the inside and had nothing left to lose except the memories of everyone they had failed to protect. Chun reached her escape shuttle as the first dimensional distortions began to ripple through the station's superstructure. Behind her, the facility that had tortured thousands of specimens from across the galaxy was collapsing into a quantum singularity that would serve as a monument to the price of making enemies of a species that never forgot a debt. As her shuttle cleared the station's destruction radius, Chun transmitted a final message across subspace frequencies that would reach every resistance cell in the galaxy. The transmission contained complete technical specifications for 17 different types of Veltar facilities, detailed anatomical charts showing the most efficient ways to kill their species, and tactical analyses of their military capabilities that would turn the T.